Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this special season of You Ask, We Answers. My name is Zoe Bambara. I am the community and youth organizer here at Women Engaged. And I am so happy to just be in community with you all. And hopefully, you guys can take some gems with you throughout this conversation and start conversations in your own home and your own community. Before we get started into this episode, I would like to go into a few organizational updates. So first, we are looking for volunteers. If you are interested, please visit our website, www.womenengaged.org/join, and where you can learn about some of the things that we do here at Women Engaged and how you can be a part. We are also hiring canvassers. So if you're interested in being a canvasser with our team, please send your resume to info@womenengaged.org. And also check out our website too to see the type of things that you would like to be involved with the work that we do here at Women Engaged. And also through womenengaged.org, you can also make sure you are registered to vote. That is very important. And even if you think you're already registered, please check just in case, because you never know what could happen to your voter registration. So we just want to make sure that when it comes to the election time, you are registered and you are ready. And we are also hiring for 4 positions. We are hiring for our senior manager movement building position, digital communication specialist, executive assistant, voter engagement database coordinator. And if you're interested in any of those positions, please reach out to NRG Consulting Group. And their email is jobs@nrgconsultinggroup.org. They are taking the lead on the search for all of these positions. So if you are interested or have any additional questions, please talk to them directly. And now we will get into this episode of You Ask, We Answers. So I will be joined by Kai, who is our If, When, How Reproductive Justice Legal Fellow. And I'll also be joined by Michelle, who is our COO. So hi, you guys.
Hi, Zoe.
How are you guys doing?
I'm tired.
Yeah. I think that was the common, we were all, tired, sleepy. This is our Friday. So ready for the weekend. Anything, you guys have anything planned this weekend to maybe get you out, this little funk?
Well, I am just going to help my mother with her beautiful rustic garden. I'm going to help her clean it up a little bit.
Nice. What about you, Michelle?
I'm just playing video games. Like
We love to see it.
that's what I was like. I'm just playing video games. I'm playing Stray, the game that follows the stray cat in a
Oh
post-apocalyptic world.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
yeah, it's like I get to live out my dreams of knocking over things that are too close to the edge. It's great.
I definitely need to go and look up that game so I can watch it on YouTube, like the gameplay, because that seems like a very interesting concept, and I feel like I'll enjoy it. And I'll probably just watch gaming videos. I've been obsessed with the Resident Evil franchise for like a while now, so I always rewatch gameplays of it. So yeah, and also drop in the comments what y'all are planning to do this weekend. If it's resting, if it's going to go see family, if it's playing video games, we would love to hear about it. And while you guys are dropping your comments, we will go ahead and get into the conversation. So I know for me personally, talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade and seeing, different opinions and things on, Twitter and TikTok and stuff, I was very confused on what the Supreme Court actually does. And I thought that the education system didn't fail me in this sense because I was like, maybe I know about the three branches of government. I know about this, but I honestly have no idea what the Supreme Court does in its totality. So I would love for one of you guys, I know we can't get into like the specifics, we would need weeks to get into that, but I would love to just kind of have like a in layman's terms, what does the Supreme Court do?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one first. So the Supreme Court is a federal court. It's the highest federal court, and they usually settle questions of state or federal law that deal with constitutionality of that law. They deal with other like federal questions as well, but that's their main role, is to look at both state and federal laws that have come before them, because there are questions about like their constitutionality. And the way they look at that, they look at it in a few ways, but they look at that by applying legal analysis, just by like it could be of the first type of question of its nature before the court, and they'll analyze like the law in its alignment with the Constitution, or they will look at precedents that they've set in the hundreds of years that they've been around, and look at their own legal analysis and use that to basically see how this similar legal question should be handled.
So it's like interpreting the law, basically. That's
yes.
all. Okay. So it's up to them to interpret the law in their own way.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, technically, no. Like they're supposed to be impartial and interpret the law to make sure that it's consistent with the values and ideals that are outlined in the Constitution. That's what they're supposed to do. I'm not saying that's what always happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting considering how old the Constitution is. And
okay, that's what I said. That's a whole other thing. It's like the Constitution is real old. It was not originally meant for people like us.
yeah.
It was very meant for like cis hetero white men. But that's a whole other thing. And there's like two schools of thought in terms of Supreme Court justices. It's folks who either are like, we have to follow the exact way that the founding fathers intended for the Constitution. And then there are other people who believe the Constitution is a living, breathing document that's supposed to change with the times. And yeah, first you're looking at like, well, like at least for me, when I first learned that, I was like, of course it should change with the times. Things change. But you'd be surprised. Well, clearly we're not. But like you'd be surprised. Yeah. There's a number of people who don't think that things should change. Like they do not like change.
That's interesting to say the least. And Kay, you kind of touched on this, but would love to like really, really dig deeper, law versus precedents, because I was seeing like when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was seeing people say that abortion is now illegal, which is not true. And I know a lot of people ran with that because they thought that that's what that Supreme Court ruling meant. It meant that they made abortion unlawful or illegal. So I would love to touch on like the difference between law versus precedents and who can enforce the law / precedents.
Yes, I really want to open up in a moment for Michelle to talk about this idea of Roe being illegal and why that is not necessarily the right wording. But I will define precedent and like get to that first part of your question, which is that like what is precedent? What what was the significance of that, like in, Jackson v. Dobbs? Well, precedent is when a court has had a previous case where it has established how to analyze the constitutionality of like a legal question. So in Roe v. Wade, the court was looking at substantive due process, which is a clause in our Constitution. And they said on the issue of abortion, there is a substantive due process right that links bodily autonomy to a privacy right and like liberty. And substantive due process is where we find this idea and this concept of like liberty, and how liberty is protected like in the Constitution. So they in Roe, that question was answered and that precedent was set, and that precedent was used to support holdings in subsequent laws that dealt with that same issue of like the privacy right as a liberty right. But a precedent is not the same thing as an established like law. I'll just say briefly, and I want to hand it to Michelle, is that Congress or the executive office can like pass, and I wouldn't say the executive office passes a law, but the executive office has like what we're familiar with as like executive orders, and they can work with Congress to like introduce laws, and then Congress can like introduce laws and pass laws, and then if there's a question about the constitutionality of that law, that's when they'll go before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will say, well, this is how this law should be enforced. But the Supreme Court also doesn't have enforcement power. So they analyze the law, they say whether it's constitutional or not, or if there should be any limits on it and how it should, how it should take life and how it should impact our daily lives. And then it's still up to Congress and the executive office to create like systems and provisions around it that enforce it. So that is my tidbit on why the decision in Roe v. Wade, and then it being overturned, why these don't represent laws in and of themselves.
Yeah, Kai pretty much said it. I mean, I feel like when you hear about a law, laws come from Congress. Laws come from your legislative body. You will never get a law coming out of any court. I think when we look at like Roe v. Wade, the only thing that it did was that they said it was unconstitutional for any state to just outright ban abortion for a number of reasons, like between the privacy, the liberty, and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that it was a law that you now have access to abortion. That's what you needed your legislators to do. But and we're probably digging into this later, but I'm probably jumping the gun, but I'm like, a lot of stuff that is done in the Supreme Court is celebrated like it's actually doing something, and oftentimes doesn't really hold accountable that your elected officials, like the ones in the Congress and in the legislative bodies, need to actually pass laws to protect these things. That's why, like, with the whole Clarence Thomas thing was so damaging, because it's like they really coming out here for like gay marriage, contraceptive usage, stuff like that, things that like on its face, like you never really needed a law for, but it's like, no, like these things were things that were done through the courts, and folks just kind of were like, oh, well, that's the law of the land. And it's not the law of the land. They're just saying that based on the Constitution, you can't outright do this something very specific. But that didn't change the fact that like they still made it really hard to get an abortion in a number of these states. Like that they restricted the ability for people to get abortions in the way they want to. So that's how I view the difference between like the law and precedents, is that like your precedents is just telling you that like based off of how we've interpreted the Constitution, it's unconstitutional for you to do that. But that doesn't mean that like you can't find loopholes or ways to like make it harder to access these things and stuff like that. And that's why laws are actually really important, because the executive branch, so that's where your president, your executive orders, your governors, can't really enforce anything if there's nothing on the books to quote unquote enforce outside of like constitutions of your state or the country. So like that's where you get like executive orders like the one that Biden put out in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade. He went and found some old law that was like, actually, we can't restrict emergency abortion. So if you need an abortion for real, we got you covered. He had to go and find a law in order to make that executive order happen. He didn't go back and find like a Supreme Court case.
Yeah, and like that's what Michelle is saying is like so important, because there's just I think not, it doesn't necessarily always come across like when in like the way that it's talked about, the way like the Supreme Court recently like is even covered like in the news, that they have no enforcement power. Like, yes, this current Supreme Court is like doing a lot of horrifying things, that passed a lot of decisions that have in the last, have just changed the landscape in so far as like what precedents are out there that kind of might frame legislative choices, but they have no enforcement power at all. What their decisions are only effectuated through the legislative and executive branches. And that's like when we learned about the three branches of government growing up. We kept hearing like checks and balances, like that is one of the most major checks and balances, is that now the legislative and executive branch are the branches that hold that enforcement power. So it feels right now, I feel like, because of maybe obviously because I feel like of the extremity of the decisions that have come out, but also because of like the frequency with which they come out, but also with the way it's being talked about, that the judiciary, the Supreme Court, is like all powerful, and they're not. So it's it is, like Michelle said, like the responsibility of our elected officials that are in line with our needs and our best interests to actually act and do their part to either enforce, find those loopholes, find those gaps, because not to run on and run on, but something that we will see is like this is like on the federal level and on the state level, like folks without our interest in mind who will try to pass laws that will preempt, like, and by preempt I mean get ahead of like those loopholes that we can find. So there's nothing in the Supreme Court decision that says that we can't really identify those loopholes and start occupying those spaces and taking care of people in other ways. This decision in Jackson v. Dobbs, just like Michelle just said, it just says there may not be any explicit constitutional protections, but it doesn't cover any other steps we can take to mitigate risk, and also to protect abortion in different ways and these liberty rights.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, for that. And I would love to kind of like, you guys kind of touched on this a lot, the enforcement piece. So would love to like know the difference between policy versus enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, the policy is like, this is how it should be done, or like this is what needs to be done. The enforcement is like, this is how it's going to get done. It's the how.
Gotcha.
The systems, the processes, the bureaucracy, the accountability, in order to make sure that things are being done correctly. That all comes from your enforcers, the executive branches of your government. So like, that's why, like, in particular, for things like gay marriage, for things like abortion rights, we need policies in place in order for folks to be enforced to provide abortions. Because right now, without Roe v. Wade, what it is that like no state is obligated to provide you abortion. That's what it is. Like it's basically like they can ban it if they want to, and if they do, that's just what it is. And that's why a lot of states already had like their trigger bills, and that's why a lot of states ended up immediately banning abortion as soon as the Roe v. Wade had happened. But in terms of like our enforcers, that's where you just have like when we start talking about criminal justice, we talk about those entities, like those are all part of like being able to enforce the ways in which policies and laws are being done. And so I think it's just really important to that when we're, especially also too with writing policy, is that because I always had to like say this too, like there's a difference between like a resolution and an actual bill. Like I just want to name that, because what I've also noticed too is that a number of entities, while I think it's great on the surface, will pass a resolution. What we need are bills, because bills have money on them. You need money in order to pay the enforcers to do their jobs. Because without it, because the resolution is more so like performative. It's like, these are the ideals that we strive to achieve, and this is what we believe in as a group of legislators that is important. But without any like money backing it, that's just on its face a very performative act to just say that this is where we stand on an issue. But a bill will have money backing it up that does also empower those who are enforcing it to make sure that it could actually like happen.
I did not know that. Thank you. And I hope that provides some other people clarity, because I didn't know that. So resolutions are like, it's like sugarcoating. It's like not
like some resolutions are important in terms of like they sometimes put pressure on different entities that may not necessarily have the power. So like perfect example, like the city of Atlanta passed a resolution early on about where they stood in terms of making sure they stand for access for abortion care. The issue is that that's a state issue. But with the city of Atlanta putting out a resolution, they're showing solidarity for this, saying that you have a city who's in favor of this, which also like showcases to the state that like, okay, there's one city in favor of this. If more cities did that kind of stuff, it kind of like helps build it up. So it still has its role and stuff like that. But I'm saying when we start looking at those who are higher up in power, like Congress, who have the ability to also pass a bill to just enable abortion rights or to codify like same-sex marriage and stuff like that, then we need to be really looking at them like, why are you introducing resolutions when what we need from you is a bill?
Yeah.
So that's where I would say the difference is. So that's why I was like, but resolutions definitely still have their place in government and like putting out things like that too. And also too, sometimes resolutions are like the teaser. They're like the appetizer. They're like let me put out this really provocative or like amazing idea that I have and just see where people are at on the issue. Like, because then that too also provides like some inkling into like how they will draft the actual bill. And I say that from example just because I know that's something that we've done with the Reproductive Freedom Act. For folks who don't know, it's a huge like mega bill that we're creating here in Georgia that's going to do a lot for healthcare and reproductive healthcare in the state. So that's happening. But we introduced a resolution, I think last year or the year before. Time is a construct that I'm really struggling with right now. But but we introduced that, so like it kind of gives like a teaser, like an appetizer, like people be like, I like that. I'm like, this is nice. Or like, I don't like that part of the resolution. Like, then that informs people who are drafting policies like where to change it up.
And when it comes to resolutions, is it like does it go through the same channels as a bill? So it still has to get, majority vote. It still has to get all of that, but it doesn't have any, I don't want to say gravity, but it doesn't hold a lot of weight. when it comes
like you're not going to enforce the resolution.
Got it.
But
So
you can pass a resolution. It got to pass through majority. Now, the majority part might be a little bit different because oftentimes things that don't involve purses, like you don't necessarily need like a super majority. It just depends on the body of government that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with like, depending on how your state operates. I know for Congress in particular, you don't necessarily need the super majority, which is 2/3, in order to pass a resolution.
Got it. And so resolution is basically, this is what we want to see. And
Yes.
this is what we're going to put. We're going to use this to put the pressure on certain people so they can know that this is what we want to see. But it doesn't hold any weight. You can't enforce anything through this resolution.
Yes.
Wow. We need more everything, education, everything. Because like I will see, posts saying Congress or whoever just passed a resolution and people are in the comments like, yay for change. And even though, of course, resolutions are important, they still don't hold that weight that like you said, a bill can hold to actually enforce something. So that's, I'm not gonna lie, that's really wild. I did not know that.
Yeah, and I think, Michelle already, definitely already said it, but I think that resolutions, at least for like us as voters, it's important for us just to know that about them, so that we know like what parts to pay attention to, like what is it saying, like who is co-sponsoring. They've already kind of voiced, that this is something that when a bill is introduced, I should also see you on that bill. And resolutions give, like Michelle was saying, these ideas to go through maybe some more like workshopping if they need it, but also like not necessarily, they give folks an opportunity to start having that conversation in, those bodies, and to start also having those conversations, both within the legislature and between the legislature and the community. So it's, as long as we understand like what resolutions create an opportunity for and how we can use them and leverage them into actual bills, that is, I think, gives our understandings of resolutions more of like a level understanding. And we're not saying, oh, like you said, though, like yay for change. We're saying like, I'm really glad I'm seeing these folks co-sponsor this, and when I talk with my legislator or I'm talking to other people about this resolution, we know that our ultimate goal is to have legislation introduced.
My mind is like blown. The education system has failed me. I literally did not know any of that. And I think it's very important. And I'm definitely like, literally, as soon as we get off of this, I'm about to go call my family and be like, did you know that you can't enforce like I'm about to call everybody. Because I think it's important that we do know that. So when we're asking, and this kind of goes into my next question as well, especially with like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and you seeing Congress pass these. Well, I don't know if it went through Congress yet. I don't remember the specifics, but like with the usage of contraceptives and like seeing it being codified, like what does that mean? What does that hold? Because like you said, it's one thing to like come up with a policy. It's another thing to actually come up with things to enforce a certain law or a bill or whatever, so we can actually see tangible change. It's one thing to say that, of course, the Supreme Court recognizes Roe v. Wade in its entirety, but it's another thing to say it's actually being enforced, like it's been codified, like abortion rights have been protected. So I would love for someone to touch on like what's the importance of codifying something.
So on the federal level, what you just mentioned, though, was a piece of legislation that was introduced, say, roughly 2 weeks ago on the federal level in the House of Representatives. And so that is a piece of legislation. It wasn't a resolution. It was a bill. It is a bill. It's, still moving, which is a way you can describe it. But in order for a piece of legislation to be considered codified and therefore fully passed, it has to go through every step of the process. So, sometimes the way something might be covered in the news is that, like, the House passed this piece of legislation. It still has to pass through the Senate. It still has to be signed into law by the executive. So that is where that piece of legislation you just mentioned is in the process of. And even when it's being passed in the Senate, or passed in the House, and then, has moved over to the Senate to take a vote, usually those go through whatever committee they're assigned to, for further discussion and maybe some amendments to those bills. So even the bill as it, it's the way it looked in the House, it might go through that committee in the Senate and undergo some more changes before it is put up for a vote in the Senate. But after, again, it has gone through the entire process and been signed into law, and not, for example, vetoed by the executive, it is able to be enforced, and probably has some enforcement provisions, will have enforcement as part of that bill. And, what, arm of, what arm of the government is going to enforce it. It'll all be kind of in that bill and built into it.
Yeah, what I like about it is that it's not tied to a specific instance. So we talk about Roe v. Wade, it's this disembodied thing, but no, it dealt with somebody's actual situation under very specific conditions, and that ruling was under those specific conditions in terms of what they decided. So that's why also too, over the years, every time an abortion bill comes up, it was still left to interpretation. This last bill, the Dobbs v. Jackson, is not the first time that the Supreme Court has even listened to a bill that could have possibly opened up the doors to overturn Roe v. Wade. So that's why it's I think it's really important that when we talk about codifying it, laws are not tied to a specific instance in that way, and it doesn't leave necessarily as much room for interpretation in terms of okay, now we have to interpret what this law means. Because usually that law will say, this is what is being protected. This is what's there. And what might be left is in terms of the exact how-tos. But it will say that this is where, you have access to contraceptives. This is what you need to have access to, things like that. This is the money that we're putting behind it to make it happen. Because the executive branch is so exhaustive, they'll be able to disseminate and understand how to break that down, whether that's granting money to each state, going through their own various departments federally. They'll figure that out. They usually don't need to always put that in the bill itself. But that's what I like about the idea, is that it's in the law, it's there. And usually at that point, it has a harder time being shaken or taken away in that way. There's less opportunity, especially if it's a law that's written, that's of course within the lines of the Constitution, because you don't really run into an issue with the Supreme Court or anybody else coming in saying you can't pass that law, especially if it's one that's lawful in that way. So I think it's a much better route in terms of really protecting it there. And that even as let's say other cases might come up, they may not even necessarily make it to the Supreme Court because the laws are on the books, and it's just going to be well, we're not hearing that case because this law is already there, go on and take that back. Or it just becomes a much easier conversation in terms of how to handle situations and things when our rights are infringed upon.
I would love, because both of you kind of touched on it, and this is something that actually kind of confuses me. So hopefully, I'm gonna take one for the team and ask this question. But when it comes to cases that go to the Supreme Court, what makes somebody bring their case to the Supreme Court? And is there certain things that the case has to have for it to go to the Supreme Court? And yeah, I guess that's my question. And I know one of the questions that I had for you guys is what does ruling mean? When the Supreme Court rules, what does that mean? But I would love to know why do some cases go to the Supreme Court? And then what does it mean for them to rule on it? Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, and Kai, you can correct me if I'm wrong too, because this is where I'm a little dusty on. Is so essentially most cases go through the judicial process and within their state first. So that's the first thing. So usually somebody will bring a case initially, there'll be a ruling on it, somebody will file an appeal, there'll be another ruling on it, and it just continues to escalate until it makes its way to the Supreme Court in that way. That's usually what happens. So like sometimes, a lot of cases do stop at the state. In the past, like perfect example, like with the 6-week abortion ban slash personhood bill that we got going on in Georgia, it was stopped at the state because the state was like, "Oh, we got Roe v. Wade. We're not doing it. Like it's not going anywhere." Right? So that's like the thing about it. Once it gets to the Supreme Court gets like a slew of like possible cases that they can take up at any time, and it's up to their discretion to decide which cases they're going to take up. Now, what goes into that discretion, it varies, but it's sometimes it's about opportunity, in terms of like, if they're just depending on the agendas of what they got going on. If it's an opportunity to rule on something they really want to talk about, if it does bring in some kind of draw into some kind of question like the actual constitutionality, like if it's something new that they're like, oh yeah, we haven't interpreted this before, that's it. And then that's really it. So they take those cases, and then when they make a ruling, it's kind of like it becomes the ruling for all the other states and other courts to follow. So like when they did make Roe v. Wade a ruling, that's why when I bring up that example again around the abortion ban, the state was able to say, oh, well, the Supreme Court already ruled on something similar to this, and this is where we stand because of that ruling. So that's why it's really important to get them in on it. But again, it just depends on if the cases bring something new that they want to re-examine or provide more clarity to. Because again, we're dealing with a constitution that's real old, and like it's real old, and it's got a lot of questions. I feel like, that something was wrong with the Constitution when they had to come out with the Bill of Rights. So I'm just saying, like, so I can go on about that. Like, the Constitution wasn't hitting all the points it needed to hit, and now we're up to like almost 30 amendments. So, it brings into question like that. So that's why it's really important to get the Supreme Court in on it, because it really does continue to help us interpret the Constitution with the times. Because again, I just feel like if Thomas Jefferson was alive right now and saw my Black self, you'd be here right now
on StreamYard.
doing what I do. Like I'm just saying, like it'd be real weird. So like that's where the rulings are really important from the Supreme Court.
Oh my goodness. No, I think too, like I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. But I think, Michelle, what you were just saying, what we're also talking about is like how the Supreme Court is like usually functioning in the past. And the Supreme Court is functioning in a very different way. Before even getting into that, while Georgia's court was waiting on that ruling from the Supreme Court, that bill was held up. But after that decision from the Supreme Court, that could have easily done something not as extreme as completely overturn Roe v. Wade. It could have just upheld Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban, which would have been horrible and had, it very, very severe implications on folks seeking abortions in the state of Mississippi. But what I think is interesting about what Georgia's court did is there's a personhood provision that we talked about already in a previous YAWA, like in that piece of legislation. And, that is its own kind of independent like constitutional question and issue. And because it was couched in this bill in Georgia, and they were waiting on that decision, I think that kind of did like slip through and kind of go kind of be allowed to stay in that piece of legislation without any like real analysis about its own questions that it raises about what does it mean to apply a personhood, a personality to unborn. And so I think also like what the Supreme Court has usually done in the past is really use its discretion, understanding, how the ripple effects of its decisions, like the impacts that those will have, like at different times. I think that the Supreme Court has had different, like, its own different iterations with folks coming in and folks leaving. But what we've seen since, around June up until now is a very high frequency of decisions from this court that has many newly Republican appointed justices that have also presented opinions that have overturned major cornerstones of which way the law has kind of leaned in this country for a while. And they've overturned, not just the constitutional right to abortion, but also expanded gun rights in that short period of time. They've allowed individual employees to, prey on the premises, which is complete, 180 when it comes to the separation of church and state and the establishment clause. And they've made it harder also for states to put a limit on the Environmental Protection Agency's power to regulate carbon emissions. They've done those huge things in those three completely separate, areas of the law. But now those areas of the law are leaning more conservative than they were before those decisions. And so I think that this and what Justice Thomas said in his concurring opinion, it is definitely signaling and kind of I think it's definitely showing kind of where the rhetoric is heading, and how probably some states will really try to introduce, even more conservative policies, because, if challenged, this court is showing kind of where it's leaning. And that is really not how the court has, it has, at least in the past, been more balanced than it is now. So I think that in this YAWA and in YAWA's in previous, we talk about what have these entities represented kind of maybe in more recent history, and kind of what we believe they should be doing and how they should function based on their structure. But what's actually happening and what we're actually witnessing is something very extreme, and that's something we should just say out loud. I just wanted to name it.
Yeah, no, they're real unhinged right now. Like I said, Supreme Court real unhinged. I honestly compare it to what was going on with January 6th in terms of when we talk about this minority evangelistic group of people who have really infiltrated very powerful positions in our government, unfortunately. And so I think but I do think though, even with what Clarence Thomas is saying about what he's coming for and stuff, one thing that's giving me hope right now, or not necessarily hope, but I'm ooh, this is interesting, is the results of what happened in Kansas. First of all, I'm from Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, by the way, not Kansas City, Kansas. We don't know. But just wanted to name that because they had on their ballot this week to vote abortion, anti-abortion into law, to ban abortion, and those folks were no. And when we look at the data that came out of it, a lot of the rural Kansas areas, while granted they elected somebody who was very, very pro-Trump, they also voted in record numbers to vote down the provision to ban abortion, which is showing that people at least to me, it shows people just don't want politicians in the doctor's office with them. It's a lot of government oversight, regardless of what aisle you may sit on personally in terms of if you would get an abortion or not, whatever. But I just thought that was really interesting because it is going to call into question that again, you have these folks here who are trying to the calls now federally from some Congress members is to pass a law that bans abortion, as opposed to the ones that we're trying to get passed to codify abortion into law. But I am curious too about what does it mean when we just turn this over to a vote to the people in terms of these things, because Clarence Thomas is over here trying to come for same-sex marriages, and it's but why? But in this sense, but why? Especially if what we're finding is that people really don't want you in their business. Like I think it's like people don't want you in their business in that way. So I thought that was really interesting too. But like I think definitely his words are like, you know, a dog whistle to like folks who are in that camp about like what is quote unquote possible. But I think the thing again is that we have to remind ourselves is that while they can try to overturn a lot of these things, is that like a lot of the stuff is really going to sit heavily with what you call it, with Congress to do law. And I think about how we had like Brown v. Board Education, which had to happen before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You see what I'm saying? Like Brown v. Board Education wasn't a law, but it did say, hey, like y'all can't make laws that continue to segregate its educational institutions. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 came through and was like, actually, since you all use federal roads to get goods and services to your private businesses, you can no longer segregate against people, and we're enforcing that. So as long as you're doing that, like you can't discriminate against people coming to your business. It's the same thing. Like those things kind of acted together, and they're not two separate things. And that's something that we need now in terms of like when we think about the ways of progress. Yes, Supreme Court can make these decisions. Like everyone was super excited about like same-sex marriage being a ruling, but what we also needed was the policy to come with it afterwards. And I find sometimes we just get really, I think it's fine to celebrate the small wins or like even the major medium wins, but like we got to just keep putting on the pressure thereafter. But I think a lot of that to your point earlier is that people just don't know. You just don't know. You just, you know, nobody's thinking that way. Like, you know, it's exciting. Like the White House was like decked out in rainbow lights and everything. It was an exciting time, and people were able to get benefits for their partners, and like, you know, it was a whole thing that came from that. And so I think it's like, and, you know, and thereafter we have dealt with some like subsequent issues in terms of like people not providing services for same-sex people, stuff like that. But you know, that's my spiel. My spiel is that we need policies. We need policies and legislation to come through and really like support some of the previous rulings that happened in the Supreme Court before they do overturn them, because it is a little bit of a upward hike if you know, in terms of like trying to get these bills passed without some of those rulings in place.
Yeah, and we need policies. And another thing I want to name is that we need money. We need the budgets to reflect the money is going through channels that are benefiting people and helping folks support their families and their communities. So yeah, just wanted to say that too. That's something we talk a lot about at Women Engaged, and that is the legislative, that is Congress, that is the legislature, that is the executive branch, that we are looking to make those decisions.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. And actually, before we like, I guess, get into like the self-care portion of the show, I would love to just quickly, because we kind of talked on it, but I wanted to get like more specific with the Clarence Thomas stuff. So I would like for one of you all to answer, what did Clarence Thomas say specifically, and how did we learn about this specifically? Like, I want to know like the real, like, specific answer to this, because I know we kind of glossed over it, but I want to know, like, I want details so people can kind of like fully understand what this man was saying. Really.
Yeah, so please jump in, Michelle, if there's, you know, a very specific thing that I missed. I think briefly, so in Supreme Court decisions, there's the majority opinion that's written by a justice, and then there are concurring opinions, which are not the holding or the ruling. They aren't what the majority opinion, what the court is holding, and what then is like the legal precedent. They're just concurring opinions. If a justice really wanted to, you know, say, this isn't the holding, but this is something I really wanted to say. This is something I think should have been considered in this court case. And it's just like fluff, really. But sometimes it just being there is something that maybe another case or another Supreme Court might be able to just like lean on that analysis and say, actually, that concurring opinion, we want to make that the holding in this case. But that rarely happens. But it lets you know what justices are thinking, and that's what happened with Clarence Thomas. He penned a concurring opinion in Jackson v. Dobbs, and in that concurring opinion, he said, "Look, we've overturned 50 years of precedent on this issue of liberty, or this how we defined or how we established that abortion is connected to liberty in the Constitution in this way." And we've done that. We've done a completely independent other analyses of liberty for other rights as well, including the use of contraceptives, same-sex marriage, and also this idea of like child rearing and like the family's right to raise their children in certain ways, have a say in like what their children are even taught in schools. Like that is something that families and parents have a right to, that is a liberty right? And so Justice Thomas was saying, I really think, this is what he said, I'm paraphrasing, but I really think, we have to look at those two. We've completely overturned this precedent, and that means that, we really have to go back and right the wrongs of the way we've analyzed liberty in these other situations as well. And so a lot of people are saying, oh, he was just saying like, we just probably have to look at the way it was analyzed. But those are very sensitive areas of the law. Those are very serious protections and precedents that have been set. And we see what happens when the Supreme Court analyzes and kind of rewrites its own precedents. And so it isn't this kind of like harmless thing to say, we're just going to take another look at it and probably get to a different conclusion in a different way. Because again, we saw what happened with a 50-year-old precedent in Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, I mean that's what happened. Like, I mean, because it's like he just wants to look back at it because of the provisions that are there. Because there's a number of cases like the contraceptive, same-sex relations, and same-sex marriage that are all covered underneath the clauses that they pretty much were like, abortion's not here. And he's in the camp that like these other rights aren't here either. That's honestly like what it is. But like I think it is always very interesting in the aftermath of a Supreme Court ruling to go back and read some of the concurring opinions, or even read some of the opinions of those who dissent, so those who voted against it but just didn't win the vote, to see where their heads are at in terms of like how they're interpreting the law and understanding the law and like what they see coming out of it. And his is just more damaging because again, it touches on like some of those things that it's like, but why, right? Like it's like the question is just like, but why? And I think that's why it's really important to again do law, because like I had to just Google it myself while we were sitting here just to remember exactly what he said. And what I thought was interesting was that the contraceptive case, which is Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965, was 1965. Like my mom was 5 years old, and like here we are still not with a law on the books to do it, and now we're trying to like beat the clock to get a law on the books when there has been plenty of opportunity for this to have happened. And I think that's why, like, I mean, we talked about this offline, but I honestly feel like this is really showcasing some of the ineffectiveness, I don't know if that's the right word, or like the lack of progress that's happening in Congress, like the lack of doing your job in Congress. like that's what I feel like it's showcasing, because it's like, right now there always as such a gridlock between the major parties, and we currently are dealing with a situation where one party is willing to make concessions at the detriment to the people who are the most impacted in order to like people please another party that really doesn't care. That just doesn't care to work with them or make concessions on their end for any policies and stuff like that. And I feel like we kind of been stuck on repeat with that, at least all my life, in terms of that. And they always try to like uplift this whole thing about like politicians being able to work across the aisle. And like, you know, that's something that like a lot of people talk about. Like Bill Clinton they were so excited about him being able to work across the aisle. Like with Biden, a lot of people were talking about his ability to work across the aisle back in the day in like the 80s and 90s and stuff. And in my mind right now, I just feel like, you know, it's interesting how much we're acquiescing to people, quote unquote, across the aisle, other people in positions of power, but we're not willing to just literally work with people who are on the streets, people who are out here in the community, like doing the stuff. So like, I could go like, I'm just saying, but it just blows my mind how like ineffective, like how people are just not doing their jobs that they're elected for, and it like really just grinds my gears. And I think that's too, again, why it's just really important for us to like have conversations like these, so people know that that's what's happening, and that like we really put their feet to the fire about it. Because I'm like, y'all need to make it happen. And that's like, you know, when we talked about this a little earlier too. I mentioned it too. It's like the contraceptive bill that's happening. Oh no, I'm frozen. Okay, I'm not frozen anymore. Okay, I was like, oh goodness, everything froze, and I got scared. But no, I was mentioning, even with this contraceptive bill, the reason that it's kind of like on pause is that we got the filibuster. And like, it's like, oh my goodness, this filibuster is like hurting the vibe, y'all. The filibuster is hurting our ability to get the Voting Rights Act passed. The filibuster is hurting our ability to get reparations. Our filibuster is hurting this ability to get this contraceptive bill. Like the filibuster, I'm just like, we got to get folks going. And so I see in the chat, Malika said, also showcasing how severely underrepresented most of us are in Congress. Yes. Right. We're not a priority to a majority of the Congress in 1965. Yes, Malika. That's why I'm like, it's just, it like really gets me a bit in terms of what's going on, and like why it's important for us to like not only vote. Of course, you can vote and stuff, but we need more people to run for office. More people who represent the communities that we work for, who we are, you know, and who share those values, who also don't have like this thing about acquiescing to power. Because my thing is this: I'm not necessarily against career politicians, because I understand that government moves really slow to make things happen, and you got to be in office to make it happen. But I just feel like we got way too many people who are too busy about maintaining seats of power instead of actually building power in communities. And what I mean by that is that you can run for office, and you're running for office for a little bit, but eventually you got to start training up the next people, and you got to move out the way. And I don't feel like any major political party right now has really done that effectively or at any mode. Like, and not even just major political parties, but I say that about like other third party people too, like Bernie Sanders. Like, I need you to get in, learn what you need to learn, and I need you to start passing that on to other people, because that's how you really build up that stream of like other like-minded folks to pass policies and stuff. So sorry, yeah, I can go on about this all the time. And so we got another question in the chat. That's my mom. Hi, Mom. You plan to run for office one day? I believe you can make a difference. The answer is no. Like at least not right now. And I say that too, just because like the campaign trail is not made for the lighthearted. I've read the stories. I've also participated from the outside looking in. I ain't ready. I ain't ready for my life to be out there. And I think the other thing is too, and that's why I said this could be a whole other thing too, is the idea about like, especially in the transition from 2008's presidential election going forward, we've just seen a shift in which people believe that they expect perfection from their elected officials. And I'm gonna tell y'all right now, I am not perfect. Like I am not the perfect candidate in that way. So you know, but I say that in a sense that like, I don't believe anybody who's running for office or has an interest in running for office has to be the perfect candidate. I am just a person who's individually trying to get over their own isms around perfectionism, and I'm just not there yet. But I'm hoping that somebody else who thinks like me is there, because I support that campaign.
I do not want a perfect candidate. I want somebody, I don't want perfect. I don't want perfection. I want somebody who I can see myself in. And that's what I want to see. Perfect candidates freak me out. Like, what kind of skeletons do you have in the closet? That type of stuff scares me. But I want to get into this last portion before I, of course, give you guys the rest of your day. And talks of, I know we kind of already talked about what our plans are for this weekend, but would love to know, like, how are you guys taking care of yourselves? How have you been taking care of yourselves since we talked last? Oh, and that's really good. I see in the comments. Also, the barrier of cost to run keeps many from participating, which is very true. And I would love to see people who come from different backgrounds to run, and not just upper middle class people, because some of them can be out of touch with working class folks. So definitely, that's a really good point. But yeah, I would love to know, like, how you guys are taking care of yourselves, and please drop in the comments how you guys have been taking care of yourselves in the past couple of weeks. And this can be anything: playing video games, sleeping, movies. I would love to hear about it. Anybody can jump on this first.
I think I probably need to get a little more sleep. And that will be how I will be taking care of myself. It's been just a really busy time. So I appreciate the question, though, because I think I'm going to hold myself to that.
I'm just trying to get my life together. Like, I've been working to clean up my space, reorganize some things, which I think is like a part of my care. And then also to get like really deep about it, but this is just where my mind is at right now, is that I'm also trying to like learn to ask for help. Like, and be able to voice that I'm struggling and need help with like certain things that are going on. So that's how I'm trying to take care of myself. It's just being very real about it, and doing it in that kind of way. But you know, we're here. And then of course video game is always a part. Y'all just know, you come on the show, Michelle is playing video games for self-care. It's a permanent part. Like,
We love to see it. We love to see it. I think for me, literally therapy and reading. Go to therapy every week. I try to read before I go to bed every night, like get away from my phone and read like a chapter or two, so I could just like be a little disconnected from my phone, because my phone is literally glued to my hand. So really trying to get out of that, like, I feel like I'm like codependent on my phone. So trying to get away from my phone and, like, formulate those habits. But that's how I'm trying to take care of myself. Been doing a lot of reading, and it makes me very proud of myself that I'm picking up books again. So yeah, and of course, drop in the comments how you guys are taking care of yourselves. But yeah, this has been YAWA. And I just want to thank our guests for coming today. This is a great episode, very informative. I learned a lot. I hope that you guys learned a lot. And just before we leave, I just want to go back over our organizational updates, and then I will let you guys have the rest of your day. But yes, if you are interested in volunteering with us, please visit our website, www.womenengage.org. And also through that, you can check your voter registration. So please go and look at that before it gets too late. We want to make sure that you guys are registered for the next and upcoming election. We are also hiring canvassers. So please send your resume to info@womenengage.org. And we are also hiring 4 more positions: our senior manager movement building position, the digital communication specialist, executive assistant, and voter engagement database coordinator. And if you're interested in any of these roles, please visit or please reach out to jobs@nrgconsulting.group.org. They are taking the lead on this search. You can find more information on our website in case you didn't get that email, but I can say the email again: jobs@nrgconsultinggroup.org. And yes, I loving the comments. Anime, yes, I love to see it. I'm getting into anime. I hope to be like a real fanatic soon. But this has been YAWA. Thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and a wonderful weekend. Bye, you guys.